The day I found out, I was standing in my kitchen making cornbread. And that's the part that stays with me, how ordinary everything felt. The radio was playing low, the oven warming up, and my granddaughter Amara was at the table with her homework spread out, tapping her pencil like she always does when she's thinking. Just a regular Tuesday. Then my phone rang, and that was the end of regular. It was Patricia from next door. We've known each other close to 30 years now, so I could hear it in her voice right away. That careful tone she gets when she's trying to figure out how to say something. She asked if I had a minute. I reached over, turned the radio down, and told her I did. She didn't rush it. Took her time. And when she finally said it, I had to stand there a second just to make sure I heard her right. She said she'd seen my son Marcus, my youngest, coming out of a real estate office downtown. Now that alone didn't mean much. Marcus was always talking about plans, ideas, ways to get something going. But then she said he wasn't alone. He was with Diane, Renee's sister. And not just standing there talking, they were signing papers. Together. For a property. I remember leaning my hand against the counter like I needed something solid under me. Because 8 months before that call, Marcus had come to me asking for money. Not a little bit either. He sat right at my dining table, same place Amara was doing her homework now, and laid everything out. Said he had an opportunity. A small commercial space he wanted to lease, turn into a barbershop. He talked about foot traffic, neighborhood growth, all of it. I asked him questions. Plenty of them. And he had answers ready. So I gave it to him. $50,000. Money I had put aside over years and years. The kind you save little by little without anybody noticing. The kind you don't touch unless it really matters. I didn't ask him to sign anything. Didn't think to. He was my son. Patricia kept talking, filling in details, but my mind had already started moving ahead of her. I asked her to go over it again just to be sure I wasn't putting something together that wasn't there. She told me the same thing. Even added that they looked comfortable. Like this wasn't new for them. That part sat with me. I thanked her for calling and hung up. Amara glanced up at me then. Asked if everything was okay. I told her it was just a quick call, nothing important. She nodded and went right back to her work. Kids have a way of trusting what you say even when it ain't the whole truth. I stayed there at the counter a while longer, then went on and finished the cornbread. Didn't even taste it when it was done. I just needed something to do, something steady. Marcus and we'd always been close. At least that's what I believed. He was the one who checked in every Sunday without fail. The one who came by if something needed fixing. After his father passed, he showed up in ways that meant something to me. Real something. And I held on to that version of him. Maybe tighter than I should have. But what I couldn't get past wasn't even the money, not at first. It was Diane. Because Renee had no idea. I felt that deep down. Renee isn't the kind to hide what she's feeling. You can read her face before she ever says a word. Something like this was going on, it would have shown. Which meant one of two things. Either Marcus had pulled people into something they didn't fully understand. Or there was something else between him and Diane that had nothing to do with business. I didn't call him that evening. I thought about it more than once, phone right there in my hand. But I knew if I spoke too soon I might say the wrong thing. Or worse, hear something I wasn't ready for yet. So I waited. That night, laying in bed, the house quiet around me, I kept replaying something he said the day I gave him the money. Clear as anything. Mama, I would never do anything to hurt you. And back then, I didn't question it. Not even for a second. But lying there in the dark, I realized something didn't sit right anymore. Because if that was true, then what exactly had I just found out? I gave myself 3 days before I made a move. Not because I was scared to face Marcus. It wasn't that. I've just lived long enough to know what happens when you act while you're still hurting. Things come out wrong. People twist your words. And before you know it, you're dealing with something bigger than what you started with. So I waited. I paid attention. I started thinking back on little things I'd brushed off before. That Wednesday I called Renee. Nothing unusual about it. We check in every so often. She picked up on the second ring and right away I could hear it in her voice. Tired. Worn down a bit. But otherwise, normal. We talked about small things at first. Amara's school, something she'd cooked the night before. Then she mentioned Marcus. Said he'd been working late a lot. Coming home stressed. Not himself exactly, but focused. She said it like she was proud of him. Like all that pressure meant he was building something for their future. I stood there listening, holding the phone a little tighter than I realized. As I knew that tone. I had used it myself years ago, back when Harold would come home quiet and distant. I'd explain it away to anybody who asked. Told myself it meant he was carrying responsibility, doing what a man's supposed to do. Sometimes we dress things up so they don't look like what they really are. I didn't say anything to Renee. Not then. I needed more than a feeling and a phone call before I started tearing into people's lives. But I couldn't sit still either. So I did something I had to think twice about. I called Darnell. Now him and Marcus, they've never quite moved the same way. Different personalities, different paths. But they keep in touch. Enough that if something was off, Darnell might have noticed. I kept my voice light. Asked if he'd heard anything about Marcus's business. Things were moving along like Marcus said they were. There was a pause. Long enough that I pulled the phone away for a second just to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Then he said, "Yeah, I heard it's going all right." But it didn't sound right. Sounded careful. So I let the silence stretch a little, then I asked him straight. "Darnell, is there something you think I should know?" He didn't answer right away. I could hear him thinking. Then he said, "Mama, I didn't want to get in the middle of anything." That right there told me everything had already started. You don't say a thing like that unless there's something to stand in the middle of. He went on to tell me he'd seen Marcus and Diane together about 4 months back. At a restaurant, not near either of their homes. Said he almost walked past without thinking twice, but something about it didn't sit right. The way Marcus noticed him from across the room and just stiffened. The way Diane wouldn't lift her eyes from the table. He said it could have been nothing. That's what he told himself at the time. But it stuck with him. For months. He carried that for 4 months and never said a word. And I understood it. I did. Nobody wants to bring something like that to their mother. Nobody wants to be the one who lights a match. It sat heavy with me. Not anger exactly. Just that quiet kind of hurt that settles in your chest when you realize people have been holding pieces of the truth around you. I didn't press him. Didn't make him feel worse than he already did. I just told him I loved him, and let him go. By then things were starting to line up whether I liked it or not. Marcus had taken a large amount of money from me, for a business I hadn't seen a single piece of. He'd been spending time with Diane, away from where anyone would expect them to be. And more than one person had seen enough to feel uncomfortable, but not enough to speak up. What I still didn't know was where the money had gone, or how much Renee knew, or what Marcus thought he was building in the middle of all this. I realized I couldn't keep piecing it together from other people's eyes. I needed to see something for myself. So the next morning I got in my car and drove downtown. I hadn't done that in a while, not without a reason. Traffic was the same, streets the same, but I felt different sitting behind that wheel. Like I was heading toward something I couldn't turn away from. I found the real estate office Patricia mentioned. Parked across the street. Sat there with my hands resting on the steering wheel, just watching the door. Didn't even know what I expected to happen. A few minutes passed. Then the door opened. And out walked Diane. By herself. She had a folder tucked under her arm, held close like it mattered. And there was something on her face. Not relief, not exactly. It was satisfaction. The kind that comes when things go your way. I stayed right where I was, watching her step off that curb. And all I could think was, whatever Marcus told me that money was for, it wasn't the whole truth. I didn't get out of the car. I just sat there and watched Diane walk down the sidewalk like she didn't have a care in the world. She crossed the street, got into a silver sedan I didn't recognize and drove off without looking back. And I stayed parked right where I was. Hands resting on the steering wheel. Just thinking. I started going over what I really knew about her. Not the polite version, not the one you see at holidays when everybody's dressed nice and passing plates around. The real impression she'd left on me over the years. Truth is, I hadn't spent that much time with Diane one-on-one. She'd always been around, of course. Birthdays, Thanksgiving, things like that. Always pleasant. Always put together. Said the right things at the right time. But there was something about her that never quite settled with me. It wasn't anything I could point to directly. Just a feeling. The way she watched people sometimes. Quiet, observant. Like she was paying attention to more than she let on. I remember noticing it early and then talking myself out of it just as fast. Told myself I was being unfair. Some people grow up learning to read a room before they speak. That doesn't make them bad. And she was Renee's sister. And Renee is good people. So I let it go. Sitting there outside that office, I had to ask myself how long I'd been doing that. letting things go that didn't quite sit right. I finally drove home, but my mind didn't come with me. It stayed wrapped up in what I'd just seen. That evening, I did something I hadn't planned on doing, but once the thought came, I couldn't shake it. I pulled out everything connected to that money. Bank statements. Transfer records. The few messages Marcus had sent explaining what he needed it for. I laid it all out across my dining room table and sat down like I was studying a case. That's something life teaches you if you pay attention. When a situation gets too close to your heart, you have to step back and look at it like it belongs to somebody else. Just for a moment. It helps you see what's really there. So I did. Marcus asked me for the money late September. I remember that clearly because the weather had just started to turn. He gave me a broad plan. Lease a space, fix it up, bring in equipment. Nothing too detailed. Just enough. The transfer went through early October. Then I went looking. Property records aren't hard to find if you know where to look. Public information. Anybody can pull it up. And what I found didn't match what he told me. A commercial property in that same area had been purchased in November. Not leased. Purchased. And it wasn't in Marcus's name. It was under an LLC. I wrote the name down and kept going. Took me most of the evening, but I found the registration in the state database. 2 names tied to it. One I didn't recognize. The other. Diane. Not even under some hidden version of herself either. Her last name, the one she kept after her divorce. I leaned back in my chair and just sat there with that. Because now it wasn't a question of misunderstanding. The money I gave my son for a barbershop lease had gone toward buying a property. A property connected to Diane. That's not confusion. That's intention. And I want to be honest about something because people always assume it's the money that hurts the most. It wasn't. Don't get me wrong, $50,000 is real money. That's years of being careful, of putting things aside instead of spending them. But what stayed with me, what really settled in my chest, was the picture of Marcus sitting across from me that day. Looking me straight in the eye. Already knowing the truth. That kind of thing doesn't happen by accident. You don't just fall into that. You decide ahead of time that you're going to tell a story and hope the person listening loves you enough not to question it. He made that decision about me. The next morning I called my attorney, Carol. She's handled things for me before. Paperwork, Harold's estate, small matters over the years. I laid it all out for her. Everything I had. She didn't interrupt. Just listened. When I finished, she paused a moment, then said, "This is recoverable. But you're going to have to talk to him first." Simple as that. Then she asked if I wanted to do that before we discussed strategy, or after. I told her I needed time. That same afternoon my phone rang again. Marcus. Calling like he always does. Easy. Familiar. Like nothing in the world had shifted. He asked how I was doing. Said he might stop by later in the week. Mentioned Amara, told him I seemed a little off. That caught my attention. Amara. She must have said something without thinking. He loves her uncle. Didn't realize what she was passing along. But now Marcus knew something wasn't quite right, and I could hear it in his voice. Underneath all that warmth, he was listening carefully. Measuring. I told him I was fine. Just had a lot on my mind. He said, "You sure, Mama? You know you can talk to me about anything." For a second, I almost told him everything. Right there. But I didn't. I had already waited this long, already taken the time to understand what I was dealing with. I wasn't about to let that moment rush me into something I wasn't ready to say the right way. So instead I told him to come by Friday. We hung up. And I noticed my hand wasn't steady anymore. Not from fear. I've been through too much in this life to be shaken like that. But there's a different kind of weight that comes with this. Getting ready to sit across from your own child. And ask them to explain who they've chosen to be. Because once that conversation happens, there's no going back to what things used to feel like. Friday was 4 days away. And I still hadn't decided whether Renee deserved to hear it from me first, or from him. Friday showed up the way hard days usually do, looking just like any other. I got up, made my coffee, stepped out back to water the plants. The sun was out, birds carrying on like they didn't have a care in the world. Amara had stayed the night, so I made her breakfast before school. She kissed me on the cheek on her way out and told me she loved me. I held on to that a second longer than I needed to. Sometime late Thursday night, I made my decision about Renee. I wasn't going to call her beforehand. Not because she didn't deserve to know, she did. More than anybody. But I needed to hear Marcus first. I needed to sit across from him and see with my own eyes whether he would tell me the truth when given the chance, or if he'd look right at me and build another story. That answer mattered. It was going to shape everything after. He came by around 2. Walked in with a bag of food from one of my favorite places like he always does when he's trying to be thoughtful. Gave me a hug, asked how I was doing, settled into the living room like it was just another visit. That ease told me something. Either he had no idea what I knew, or he was a lot better at this than I'd ever realized. I let him talk for a bit. Asked about the kids. Asked about Renee. He answered smooth, no hesitation. Then I stood up, went to the dining room and brought back the folder I'd put together. I set it on the coffee table between us and sat down. Didn't say a word. He looked at the folder, then at me. Something shifted in his eyes. Not guilt, not right away. It was more like he was doing math in his head, trying to figure out where things stood. Then he picked it up. I watched him as he went through it. Page by page. The bank records. The property listing. The LLC registration. Slowly, that calm he walked in with started to crack. His jaw tightened. His shoulders changed. When he set the folder down, he didn't look at me right off. Just stared at the floor for a second like he was putting something together. Then he started talking. Gave me just enough truth to get by. Said yes, the money went into a property. Said it turned out to be a better opportunity than the lease. Said he made a judgment call and planned to tell me once things started paying off. Come back to me with more than he took. I let him finish. Then I asked about Diane. That silence was different. Longer. Heavier. He said it was complicated. Said they connected over real estate, shared interests. That it started as business. And then he stopped. Didn't take it any further. He didn't have to. I stayed calm. Didn't raise my voice. That's not how I handle things like this. I told him the money wasn't even the main thing sitting with me. What mattered was that moment. Him sitting across from me, looking me in the eye, building a story careful enough to earn my trust. I told him that wasn't a mistake. That was a decision. A decision about who I was to him. That's when the tears came. And I believe they were real. Marcus has always felt things deeply. But I've lived long enough to know that feeling bad and taking responsibility are two different things. So I kept going. I told him I'd already spoken to my attorney. That I expected a full accounting, where the money went, what that property was worth now. And if he wasn't willing to work toward paying it back, I would handle it legally. No anger in it. Just facts. Then I told him the part that changed the air in the room. I said Renee was going to know. Not out of spite. Not to hurt anyone. But because she was his wife and she had a right to understand what was happening in her own life. And with her own sister. I gave him until Sunday. Told him if he didn't tell her himself, I would. He sat there for a long time after that. Didn't argue. Didn't try to explain it away again. The food he brought sat untouched in the kitchen. When he finally got up to leave, he didn't hug me. Just stood at the door with his back to me for a second, then walked out. I listened to his car pull away. And the house got real quiet. Strange how a place can look exactly the same but feel completely different. Same furniture, same light coming through the windows. But something underneath it all had shifted for good. Sunday came. And he didn't call her. Because that evening Renee called me. I knew from the first word out of her mouth she was hearing it all for the first time. I stayed on the phone with her a long while. Didn't rush to fill in every detail. She needed space just to sit with what she already knew. But I told her one thing clear, she hadn't done anything to deserve this. And she wasn't going to face it alone. The money, that part is still being handled. It may take time and I've made my peace with that. I've lost things before. I know how to steady myself when something slips out of my hands. But what I can't get back is the version of my son I thought I knew. That's the part people don't always talk about. When someone close to you breaks your trust, it doesn't just hurt in the moment. It reaches back, starts changing how you remember things. I still love Marcus. That hasn't gone anywhere. But love doesn't mean pretending. And at this stage in my life, I'm not willing to shrink myself just to make someone else more comfortable. Not even my own child. Every now and then I find myself back in that kitchen standing at the counter thinking about that Tuesday. The cornbread in the oven. The radio playing low. That quiet, ordinary moment before everything shifted. And I think about how peaceful life can feel. Right before you realize you've been standing in the middle of something you never saw coming.